So I have just finished Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. I was surprised I had it in my collection. I didn't buy it on Amazon, otherwise I'd tell you the date I got. I must have picked it up at a garage sale at some point. But I thought I'd just go ahead here and flip through these pages and stop at the ones that I have dog-eared for a little bit closer inspection. Taylor, Tucky. It's one of the communities that I ran for President Bush's '04 election campaign in downriver Detroit, where I lived for 17 years. I spent 4 years in Kentucky, a year and a half of them, after I received a promotion to move to Hazard, Kentucky, and that's where I found out that I had a Southern soul. And although I moved from Kentucky to Kansas, which I absolutely loved and miss Kansas City dearly, it was those 4 years in Kentucky that I realized I had a Southern soul. And although my folks were Hoosiers, which is it's like as close as you're going to get to a Southerner up north, when I finally got down to Nashville, I realized that I was really a lot happier being around Southerners. They live by different lights. Chivalry still very much forms personality, and although we've got our share of problems, I'll cast my lot with the Southern man and the Southern ethic anytime. Now, JD is a little bit interesting story in that he grew up in he grew up in Middletown, Ohio, but his family's from Bloody Breathitt County, which is a county just north of Perry County, where Hazard is the seat. And although that county was out of my sales district, I would drive through it about 4 times a month at least. Now, I'll never forget the big old sign. I wonder if it's still there on the south side of town, the big old billboard which said, "Alcohol bites as the serpent." And it was a dry county back then. Perry County was in the middle of 7 dry counties. It was the only wet one, so every road out of the county had a liquor store on the border. So, my thoughts here on JD's book is, of course, I love the reminiscence, and in reading it, my brain was redolent with the smell of the lush and humid hollers. But of course, the story moved mostly to Middleton after that, which is a move from the Bible Belt to the Rust Belt. And growing up in a little country town in the cornfields, northwest Ohio, just south of Toledo, I was more of a Rust Belter than I was a Bible Belter. Northwest Ohio, obviously, Toledo is practically a suburb of Detroit. And so a lot of that King Ford mentality pervades the entire area. Although I grew up in the town of 1,100 people, that was primarily German and farmer community, bedroom community. So I was insulated in many regards from the problems of the hardest grinding parts of the Rust Belt. And although many of my friends were not, their parents were communing. So I found this book to be a very young man's book. I think that he asks a lot of the right questions. I'm not sure that he has found the right answers. And I'm very worried about, frankly, at least at this point, he wrote this book when he was 31 years old in 2016. He still seemed to be very much unformed as a statesman. And honestly, I've got to admit, he was very honest about how he still struggles with many of the worst attributes of his formation of personality. Of course, I throw in with Russell Kirk, who in his epigram to, I believe it was a conservative mind even, quoted Coleridge and says that most men live like bats in twilight, picking up only the reflections and refractions of the philosophy which holds the day. And it's very, very difficult for people to escape the culture milieu that in which they were raised. very few, in the book that I haven't finished on sociology, I say that you can judge a society by two things: the typical man it produces and its art. And so, like I say, very few people are able to escape the culture that forms them. I think JD has in many ways. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's a bad thing for Hillbilly to be our president or vice president, but I would like to, I just don't know anything about him, frankly. In 2016, I realized that my party was no longer interested in the bookishness of and the things that I had to offer. In so many ways, I just pulled out of partisan politics altogether. And instead of reading the Times, like the New York Times, instead of reading the Times, spent my time reading the Eternities. And as I'm about ready to re-enter that world again, it is very interesting. I would love to know what JD has read since then. I wonder if he has read The Catastrophe, what is it? The Tragedy of American Compassion by Marvel Lasky. I wonder if he's looked into finding answers for the great questions that he poses about what we're going to do to solve so much of the cultural issues. Politics is always downstream from culture, and so I wonder if he realizes now a point that he doesn't quite seem to grasp entirely, which is how devastating the Great Society programs were, because, and it's funny, as I mentioned this to Mitch McConnell at the Kentucky Derby when he took an interest in I just met him, and he took an interest in my time in Kentucky, and I mentioned that had spent at that point about 15 years in the suburbs of Detroit, and I made the point that socialism doesn't care about race. It will empty a white or a black person it will rob them of their dignity and initiative, and lure them into a dependent underclass, which will steal away their hope. And one of the most important things I think we can do is to build a good society, and that a good society, as contradistinction to a bad society is one in which it's easy to do the wrong thing, the evil thing, the nasty thing, the corrupt thing, the criminal thing. Whereas a good society is the type of society that he began to see, and makes the point that there's a whole other world where it's, this upper class world, that it's very easy to do the good thing, the right thing, the virtuous thing, the charitable thing, the loving thing, the helping thing, the kind thing. And that's the kind of society we need to build. A society that isn't enforcing this stuff by law, but rather it's something that we just breed and imbue with each emerging generation with the ability to live a better and more robust life. I think Charles Murray wrote an incredible book. He's written several, of course, but one in particular comes to mind, which is Coming Apart, where he talks about how the middle classes of America, white America particularly in this book, is going either towards the upper class or it's fallen into that dependent underclass. And he says one of the biggest mistakes we make is that we don't preach what we practice, and instead we make excuses for, or we tolerate these destructive behaviors of underclass that is not taking advantage of the opportunities that are there for you. I do commend JD for pointing out that there are plenty of opportunities that the hillbilly can take advantage of. Just as I saw working in the bowels of Detroit as a volunteer in the soup kitchens, food pantries, and homeless shelters, that there are plenty of opportunities. It's just folks don't realize how to seize them, how to take advantage of them, and they don't have the formation of personality, the character traits that will enable them to not only seize them, but to keep hold of them and live the life that they should have, and live life to their fullest. So anyhow, that's enough of my ranting. I'm going to get back to my Southern Studies section here. it was a good little trip. I'm very interested in knowing what he has done in the 8 years since he's written that book, and if he's become more of a statesman, less of a hot-headed hillbilly, and what his ideas are. I'm very worried about him being he is a trade warrior. He seems to be in favor of protections and tariffs, which I vehemently disagree with. I think that we can foster a humane economy here in America without making the mistake that economic history has on just about every page, the mistakes of trying to put the thumb on the scale and pick winners and losers in trade wars. So anyways, I will catch you next time.